Hey, how's it going? I'd like to present you with a hypothetical situation. Let's say we have a murder case. A detective is assigned to the case, and a crime scene investigative team is sent. While the crime scene investigators, or CSI people, are busy gathering evidence, the coroner's department is there to photograph and give an initial examination of the body, and then they take the body back to the lab. The detective in the case, who we'll call Carl for the sake of the video, um, he does like a cursory examination. He sees how crime scene was laid out, and he comes up with a suspect. Now, Carl, of course, he's a very ambitious man, and once he leaves the department, let's say he's a sheriff's deputy, that he wants to run for public office, write books, get on talk shows, that sort of thing, and make a lot of money, hoping to cash in on his career as a law enforcement officer. And this case has generated a lot of publicity, a lot of public attention is focused on it, and he feels pressured to find the answers to the case. So he settles on a suspect, and he's absolutely sure that this suspect is the killer. So he interrogates the suspect, and the suspect says, look, I wasn't even there. I've never even been to the place. I don't know the guy. And when the detective calls the coroner and says, when was time of death? And the coroner says, well, between this time and this time of the evening. The suspect says, well, I have an alibi. I was someplace else, and all these people who saw me. And he has not only people who know him with him when he was supposedly there, but also people who were not acquainted with him, who also remember him. They even have videotape evidence that he was not at the scene of the crime. But Carl just, he's absolutely sure that this suspect is the guy. Never mind all the eyewitnesses and the videotapes. He's absolutely sure. And he doesn't have any other leads. So while he is grilling this guy and the pressure's on for him to find answers, the CSI team, they say, well, okay, we've gathered hair and blood and skin samples from the scene, some from the victim, of course, and some from the possible killer. Now, while the hair color matches your suspect, tests show it's a different person. It's not him. And even the blood type matches, but tests also indicate that it is not your suspect. So while the hair color and the blood type are the same, evidence from tests in the lab indicates that they come from two different people. Footprints don't match, fingerprints don't match, nothing matches. I mean, aside from hair color and blood type, that's about it. But they think that with enough time, they can narrow it down a little bit in terms of DNA profiles from convicted criminals in the past. But Carl, of course, he's under pressure to solve the case as quickly as possible. So he settles on the suspect. He takes it to the prosecutor's office. He tells the prosecutor, I am sure that this is the guy. The prosecutor says, well, what about all this other evidence? He says, I can handle that. Don't worry about that. So it puts a pressure on the prosecutor, takes the case to trial. And of course, in our judicial system, both the prosecution and the defense have all the evidence that has been gathered. Any evidence that the prosecutor gets into their possession, the defense attorney also has it. So at the trial, Carl, with his years as a sheriff's deputy, he presents his case. He says, this is why I think that it is a suspect. In fact, I know it's a suspect. It is him, and it can't be anyone else. The hair color and the blood type of the alleged killer that are found on the scene match the suspects. So then it's the defense's turn to cross-examine. And the defense says, well, okay, hair color and blood type match, but hair color and blood types generic enough that you could match any number of people. And your own lab says the genetic evidence from the blood and the skin and the hair don't match for the defendant in this case. Likewise, fingerprints and footprints don't match the suspect either. Well, Carl's in a bind at this point because he has all this scientific evidence telling him that he is wrong. And he's there in front of a jury and the judge. So Carl resorts to his fallback position, which is to attack not the defendant in the case, but the people who told him that he was wrong, the guys from CSI. Now, Carl touts among his credentials the fact that he has a Bachelor of Science in Criminology. So he is an educated man. He's also deeply religious. He even has a Master's of Divinity from a theological seminary. So Carl puts it to the jury. Says, what does it make this man, and he lays out why he thinks it's him. And he's such a good speaker that just the force of his voice alone could probably convince people that, just in terms of just his eloquence presenting his case. Then he turns his attention to the guys in the lab. He's like, look, I don't know about all this scientific mumbo jumbo. I mean, who are you going to believe? A bunch of geeks in a lab coat working in a lab. They don't know what it's like to be a cop out on the beat, catching killers. A policeman has to rely on his instincts and what makes sense to him. You're going to believe me, or a guy spends his whole day in the lab wearing a coat. Besides, I'm a devout believer in the Almighty, and most of the guys who work in the lab are either agnostics or they're atheists. I'm a man of God committed to the truth. These men, they're atheists. They have no moral foundation that tells them that lying is wrong. And then, of course, Carl finds out there are some details about the evidence that the guys in the lab were not quite entirely sure about. For example, the coroner's department states that, well, the victim was stabbed and beaten. And one coroner says that he died as a result of the stabbing. Another coroner says, no, he died as a result of the beating. And there's some other minor details in terms of the lab work, such as the possible ethnic background of the killer. And Carl sees these disagreements among these supposedly educated scientists. How can you trust you? These can't even agree on how the guy died. They can't even agree on what his ethnic background might happen to be. You're going to believe me or a bunch of scientists who can't even agree among themselves on important details of the case? And the scientists, of course, the guys from the CSI, these are all educated men, backgrounds in science, like chemistry, biology, and spent years in college getting their degrees. And of course, when they get up on the stand to give their evidence, they're really not as accomplished public speakers as Carl is. They have a hard time explaining the science of their findings to an audience made up entirely of laymen, people who don't know an awful lot about science. So while Carl can speak energetically and quite convincingly to a group of people who really don't know anything about science, when it comes to a scientist trying to present himself to the jury, it's all mumbo-jumbo to them. So Carl has a suspect that he absolutely wants convicted of the crime. And the only thing that, between the evidence gathered by the CSI and the suspect, is hair color and blood type. There's a mountain of evidence to say that Carl is wrong, that he's got the wrong guy. Wrong man is on trial. An innocent man could go to prison. So, I ask you, if the jury were to be convicted, were to convict the suspect, the defendant in this case, for the murder, despite overwhelming evidence that it's a different person, wouldn't that be a serious miscarriage of justice? I would think so. I mean, when you get to hair color and blood type, I know what my blood type is. And obviously, my hair color is brown. My blood type and my hair color match a large percentage of the American population, and the world population, in fact. But of course, it's hard to overcome those people who are motivated by, zealously motivated by personal self-interest, to get out there with tiny little bits and pieces that might support their point of view, but yet ignore mountains of data to tell them that what they are saying is wrong, untrue. So this is how I see people like Mr. Carl Gallups. He has a Bachelor of Science in criminology. And he looks down his nose, at least he says he does, in his videos when he talks about scientists who proclaim the truth of evolution, referring to them as silly scientists. He touts his Bachelor of Science degree in criminology, which is, of course, a behavioral science. It's not physical science like biology, zoology, paleontology, things like that, where the data is accumulated in the lab. Criminology's data is accumulated through studies and interviews. And, of course, he touts himself as a very moral man, God-fearing, and all these scientists who gathered this Mount Everest-sized pile of data telling him that he's wrong, or atheists and agnostics, at least a large portion of them are. There are a lot of them that are Christians and Jews, of course, Muslims, but yeah. The way I see someone like Carl Gallups, he sees money to be made in ignoring mountains of evidence that say he's wrong, because he gets to have a TV show, gets a YouTube channel, sells books, tapes, DVDs. He gets to make his money proselytizing creationism. And the facts be damned. Because he has a personal self-interest in convincing as many people as possible that creationism is real science and it's true. The scientist in the lab doesn't really have all that much interest in making sure, aside from having quality scientists being educated in our universities and colleges, because they get paid the same whether you and I believe in creationism, science, evolution, or the stork delivered us from outer space. So this Carl Gallups and legions of people like him are perpetuating what it can't be described as a miscarriage of justice. It can only be described as a miscarriage of science, a miscarriage of truth. And I will certainly miss the living dinosaur if he decides that his latest video will also be his last, because I don't see anyone else out there confronting P.P. Simmons as directly and as much forthrightness, honesty as the living dinosaur. Anyway, you guys take care.